family tragedy. Watts family murder.
I am still struggling to understand how and why this tragedy occurred. I may never be able to understand and accept it, but I pray for peace.
A perfect home, a husband, a wife, and 2 little girls who seem to have everything. But what happens when the image of perfection hides a storm brewing just beneath the surface? In August 2018, the Watts family vanished without a trace, leaving behind a silent house, unanswered questions, and a husband whose calm smile concealed a horrifying truth. The perfect facade. In the quiet neighborhood of Frederick, Colorado, the Watts family looked like the picture of the American dream. Chris Watts, a quiet man who worked in the oil fields, lived with his energetic wife Shanann and their 2 young daughters, Bella, 4 years old, and Celeste, 3 years old. Their big 5-bedroom house on Saratoga Trail was filled with toys, laughter, and family moments that Shanann often shared on social media. To friends and neighbors, they seemed like a couple deeply in love. Shanann often posted about how much she adored Chris, calling him her best friend, and praised him as a father. But behind the cheerful photos and videos, the truth was much darker. The family was drowning in debt, almost $500,000, and had even filed for bankruptcy just 3 years earlier. Their house, which looked so perfect on the outside, was in foreclosure, and bills piled up each month. Shanann worked as a promoter for a company called Lavelle Thrive, which sold health and wellness products. She frequently traveled for business trips, while Chris's job in the oil industry provided steady but modest pay. The gap between their public lifestyle and their real finances was growing larger every month. On top of the financial strain, Chris had started a secret affair just 6 weeks earlier with a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger. He told her he was separated from Shanann and nearly divorced, while at the same time pretending to be a loving husband at home. He even brought Kessinger to his family's home when Shanann and the girls were away visiting family in North Carolina. Shanann's trip to North Carolina had been stressful. She had conflicts with Chris's parents, especially his mother, Cindy Watts, and Shanann felt unsupported by Chris. Meanwhile, Chris was living a dangerous double life, and it was only a matter of time before it exploded into something unthinkable. The disappearance. On August 13th, 2018, everything seemed wrong. Shanann had returned home late the night before from a business trip in Arizona. Her friend Nicole Atkinson dropped her off at about 1:48 a.m., but by the next morning, Shanann wasn't answering texts or calls. She had a prenatal doctor's appointment that day, and missing it was completely out of character. Worried, Nicole went to the Watts home later that afternoon. What she saw immediately set off alarm bells. The house was eerily silent. Their dog wandered inside alone. A child's blanket was on the floor. Breakfast dishes sat untouched in the sink. Shanann's purse was still there, along with her keys. Her phone was hidden deep in the couch cushions, almost as if someone had tried to conceal it. On the nightstand, her wedding ring had been carefully placed. The family's Lexus SUV was parked in the garage, with both children's car seats still inside. It looked as if the family had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind a scene that felt both frozen in time and disturbingly staged. Nicole called the police right away, and Officer Coonrod was the first to respond. Body camera footage from that day later became key evidence, showing Chris acting strangely calm while neighbors and Nicole were frantic. One neighbor even whispered to police that Chris wasn't acting right. The pleading husband. As police and news crews gathered outside, Chris stepped into the spotlight.
In that interview, Chris admits he and Shanann had exchanged words before she disappeared.
It wasn't like an argument. We had an emotional conversation, but I'll leave it.
News broadcast nationwide, he begged for his family's safe return. He spoke about how much he wanted them home, his voice breaking at the right times. But something about his words felt wrong. Body language experts and detectives noticed it immediately. His eyes darted strangely when answering questions. His emotions seemed forced, like a performance. He admitted to having an emotional conversation with Shanann about their marriage, but couldn't explain why she would leave behind her phone, medication, car, or the children's belongings. More suspiciously, he didn't seem curious at all about what police were discovering, never asking questions about leads, searches, or evidence. The mask of a grieving husband was starting to slip, and underneath, something far colder was showing through. During this time, surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera surfaced, showing Chris backing his truck into the driveway early that morning and making several suspicious trips back and forth. Investigators quickly realized he was loading something large into the vehicle. At that moment, no one knew what it was, but the truth, once uncovered, would be more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. The web unravels. Investigators quickly turned to the family's digital records, and what they found destroyed Chris's story. Hundreds of secret text messages between Chris and Nicole Kessinger revealed a passionate affair. He had told her he was nearly divorced, looking for apartments, and planning a future together without Shanann or the children. Meanwhile, Shanann's texts to her friends revealed she was worried about Chris becoming distant and cold. The truth was clear. Chris wasn't a heartbroken husband. He was a man desperate to erase his family in order to start a new life with his mistress. The confession and the lie. Brought into the police station, Chris stuck to his story at first. But when investigators confronted him with evidence of the affair and asked him to take a polygraph test, everything began to crumble. He failed the test so badly that the examiner later said it was one of the clearest failures he had ever seen. Before the test, the examiner told Chris, "There's only two people in this room who know the truth, you and me. And after this test, just me." Those words shook him, but he still tried to lie. At one point, investigators played back surveillance footage of him loading his truck, forcing him to confront the evidence he had tried so hard to hide. Finally, when alone with his father, Chris admitted to killing Shanann, but even then, he told a terrible lie. He claimed that Shanann had killed the children in a fit of rage after learning about his affair, and that he killed her in response. It was a twisted attempt to shift the blame, to make himself look less guilty. During this interrogation, detectives noted Chris's chilling calmness. Even after confessing, he showed little genuine emotion, as if discussing something routine rather than the murder of his family. Chris then agreed to lead police to the bodies, still trying to control the story and manipulate the truth. But what they found was worse than anyone could have imagined. The horrific discovery. Chris directed investigators to a remote oil field site called Survey 319, where he worked. There, beneath the harsh summer sun, they uncovered Shanann's body buried in a shallow grave near the oil tanks. The search for Bella and Celeste led to an even more horrifying discovery. The little girls had been forced through tiny openings in two massive crude oil tanks. Each hatch was only 8 inches wide, just barely large enough for their small bodies to fit. Investigators found heartbreaking details. Strands of blonde hair stuck to the hatch, and scratches on Bella's body that showed she had fought against what was happening. Investigators later determined that Shanann had been strangled, and the girls had been smothered. The autopsy also showed bruising consistent with force being applied to the children's mouths and noses, confirming they had been smothered by Chris himself. One officer later testified that the smell of crude oil mixed with the sight of children's clothing floating near the tanks was something he would never forget. The sight of those huge tanks, knowing they had been turned into graves for 2 innocent children, was a moment of pure horror that would never be forgotten. Justice served with undeniable evidence, Chris finally gave up his lies. On August 21st, Chris was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. He received 2 counts of first-degree murder for each daughter because they were under the age of 12, and he was in a position of trust. Chris was also charged with the unlawful termination of a pregnancy and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. He was released on $5 million bail. Chris pleaded guilty to the 3 murders on November 6th. The death penalty was not an option in the case because Shanann's family did not want another killing to occur. During his sentencing hearing, Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandra Zuchek, told Chris that they loved him like a son and couldn't fathom why he would murder their daughter and grandchildren. On November 19th, Chris was sentenced to 5 life sentences, 3 consecutive and 2 concurrent, without the possibility of parole. He received an additional 48 years for terminating Shanann's pregnancy and 36 years for tampering with a deceased body. After his sentencing, his bail was revoked and he was taken into custody. Today, he is serving his life sentences at the Dodge Correctional Institution, a maximum security prison in Walpen, Wisconsin. In a 5-hour follow-up interview with investigators, Chris said that he strangled Shanann after fighting about his wish to separate. While he was attempting to bring Shanann's body downstairs, the girls woke up and saw him. He then loaded the body of Shanann and strapped the girls in the car, then drove to the oil field site. He then smothered the girls individually with a blanket that was in his truck and then disposed of the 3 bodies. In later interviews from prison, he admitted that the murders were premeditated. Chris also admitted that 4-year-old Bella fought back, screaming, "Daddy, no," as he smothered her, an image that has haunted everyone who has followed the case. This detail showed just how deliberate and cruel his actions were. Behind every photo, every video, every carefully crafted social media post was a reality no one saw coming. Chris Watts will spend the rest of his life behind bars, but no sentence can measure the loss of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and the unborn child who never had a chance. Their story is a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters don't lurk in the shadows. They live behind the front doors of houses that look just like ours.